were all it took to shatter the illusion that war could remain frozen forever. Because the moment a steel monster crawled out of the smoke and mud, crushing barbed wire beneath its tracks, while bullets bounced harmlessly off its armored skin, the deadlock of trench warfare began to crack, and the world realized that warfare would never be the same again. And to understand why tanks were invented, we must return to one of the darkest chapters in human history, a time when progress turned against itself, and modern technology trapped millions of men in a living nightmare. Because when World War I erupted in 1914, generals on all sides believed it would be a short, decisive conflict fought with bold movement and heroic charges. But instead, the war collapsed in a stalemate as machine guns, artillery, and rapid-fire rifles made open-field attacks suicidal, forcing soldiers to dig into the earth for survival. And soon the Western Front became a scar stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland, a maze of trenches, dugouts, and fortifications where armies stared at each other across a deadly strip of mud known as no man's land, a place littered with corpses, shell craters, and tangled barbed wire, where every attempt to advance ended in catastrophic loss of life. And day after day, month after month, year after year, millions of soldiers lived like prisoners underground, surrounded by rats, disease, filth, and constant fear, while artillery shells rained down without warning and machine guns turned human waves into slaughter. And commanders faced a horrifying truth. Traditional cavalry charges were useless, infantry assaults were massacres, and artillery alone could not break the enemy's defenses. Because even after days of bombardment, defenders emerged from bunkers to mow down advancing troops. And the war reached a brutal equilibrium where neither side could move forward without losing tens of thousands of men. And it was within this nightmare of stagnation and suffering that the idea of the tank was born, not as a weapon of glory, but as a desperate solution to a desperate problem. Because the fundamental challenge of trench warfare was simple yet deadly. How do you cross no man's land under fire, crush barbed wire, survive machine gun bullets, and protect infantry as they advance? And early attempts to solve this problem failed spectacularly. With armored cars unable to move through mud, infantry shields offering little protection, and new tactics costing lives faster than they saved them, until a radical idea began to circulate among a small group of innovators. What if a machine could move across rough terrain, climb over trenches, withstand gunfire, and bring firepower directly to the enemy's lines? And this idea found early champions within the British military, including officers like Ernest Swinton, who recognized that agricultural tractors with caterpillar tracks could cross broken ground where wheels failed. And if such a vehicle could be armored and armed, it might finally restore movement to the battlefield. And with support from figures like Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, a secret development program began under the innocent name Landships Committee, because secrecy was essential to prevent enemy intelligence from discovering the project. And engineers worked feverishly to transform crude prototypes into viable war machines, facing enormous technical challenges from engines overheating to tracks breaking, from steering problems to crew suffocation inside metal hulls. Because no one had ever built such a vehicle before, and even as skeptics dismissed the idea as impractical or ridiculous, the pressure of endless casualties pushed development forward, and by 1916 Britain produced its first operational tanks, massive, slow-moving, armored vehicles armed with machine guns and cannons. Officially designated as tanks to disguise their true purpose during transport, a name that would become permanent. And when these machines were first deployed at the Battle of the Somme in September 1916, their performance was mixed and often unreliable, with many breaking down before reaching the front. Yet their psychological impact was immense, because for the first time soldiers witnessed something terrifying and unstoppable emerging from the fog of war, crushing obstacles, crossing trenches, and advancing under fire. And although early tanks were slow, mechanically, fragile, and dangerous to their own crews due to fumes, heat, and limited visibility, they proved something revolutionary: that armored, tracked vehicles could survive the killing ground of no man's land and support infantry advances. And as both sides studied these encounters, it became clear that a new era of warfare had begun. And by 1917 and 1918, tanks were used in greater numbers and with improved tactics, working alongside infantry and artillery in coordinated assaults, breaking through trench systems that had resisted attack for years, restoring mobility to the battlefield and allowing advances measured in miles rather than yards. And while tanks did not single-handedly win World War I, they fundamentally altered the nature of combat by ending the static stalemate that defined trench warfare, proving that technology could overcome defensive dominance. And the war ended with lessons learned at an unimaginable human cost. Lessons that nations studied intensely during the interwar years, refining tank design, speed, firepower, and coordination, because the tank had proven itself not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of modern warfare, a fusion of industry, engineering, and violence. And during World War II, tanks evolved into faster, deadlier machines that dominated battlefields across Europe, Africa, and beyond, shaping doctrines of blitzkrieg and mechanized warfare. Yet the reason tanks were invented remains rooted in the mud and blood of World War I trenches. In the suffering of millions of soldiers trapped by modern firepower and outdated tactics. Because the tank was not created to make war more destructive, but to break a deadly stalemate that consumed lives without progress. And when we look back at the first tanks crawling through no man's land, we see not just machines of war, but desperate answers to impossible conditions, born from human ingenuity under pressure. And today, tanks remain powerful symbols of military strength, yet their origin story is a reminder that the most terrifying technologies often emerge not from ambition alone, but from necessity, fear, and a desire to escape suffering. And as modern warfare continues to evolve with drones, missiles, and cyber conflict, the tank stands as a turning point in history, the moment when war regained movement, when trenches lost their grip, and when a steel machine ended one of the most brutal forms of warfare humanity has ever known, reminding us that even in war, innovation is driven not just by conquest, but by the search for survival, effectiveness, and an end to unbearable deadlock.